So it's base component time. In the components folder, I'll add a new UI folder. You could also name it base, but I'll go with UI because I have some core UI elements in there. And I'll add a base card.view file in there, and also already a base button. And also, didn't mention before, but we'll need it as well, also a base badge, which will basically render a badge. For example, the areas of expertise here. There, I want to use that. But let's start with the base card. That will be a very simple component in the end. The template is just a div and then a slot inside of the div, because I want to use this card as a wrapper around any content you want. Now I'll give this a class of card and then add some scoped CSS code. And attached you find a base card CSS file which holds the styles you should paste in here. This will give us this classic card look and also restrict the width we're taking. And that's already it for the card. Now we can use that card by registering it in main.js as a global component, because I'm using it in many different areas of the app. Hence, I want to use it as a global component. So in main.js, I'll import base card from /components UI base card.view. And then here, use my app to call the component method and register a base-card, a card component, which points at this base card component we're importing. And now we can use it in coaches list, for example, to wrap everything in this section. So this controls div and the unordered list. So here I'll use base-card, my opening tag, and then close it after this h3 tag here. And with that, if we save this, this looks much nicer already. But now we got all these buttons. And actually, these here, of course, are links and not buttons. But I would argue they should look like buttons, because whilst they technically are links, well, in this UI, having them look like a button makes more sense. And of course, we also got a button here, for example, which should look like a button. So I want to build a base button component which supports both real buttons and links. And we can build something like this and apply the same styling no matter whether it's a link or a button. And we're going to do this in the base button component here. Here we need a template, and in that template, of course, we also have a button, the regular HTML button, which takes a slot. But it will not just have the button. We also want to support links. So I will actually also add router link here as a component, which takes a slot. But of course, only one of the two should be rendered at the same time. So therefore, I will add a script and accept some props. And here I'll actually use the object form of defining the props, simply to also practice this again. Most of the time I used just the array form because it's shorter, but using that object form, of course, allows you to be more explicit about your props. So which props do I need here? I want to have a link prop. The link prop should signal to us whether we want to render a button, or if link is true, if we want to render a link. So therefore here, I will set the type here to Boolean because I expect to get a Boolean here. Set it to not required. It's optional. You don't have to specify it. And set the default value to false. So by default, we don't render a link, but a button. And we can use the link prop now here to use or to render the button if not link, hence the exclamation mark, and render the link, the router link, in the else case, if link should be true. This allows us to switch from outside the component between a button and a router link. I also want a to prop here, which I need if a link is set. This will get a string value, and here I want to set this to not required, but set the default value to /nothing. The to prop is a useful prop if we do render a router link because in that case, of course, I want to bind to on the router link to my own to prop, which I just defined, so that we know where this link should go to. And then there's one last prop which I want to support, and that's the mode prop. This is a prop that allows us to control the styling, the look of this button from outside. Here I simply want to get a string, and this is also not required. The default then is just an empty string, or null, let's say. And I will use mode as a class on the button. That, of course, would theoretically allow us to pass anything as a class that will be added, but I will only support a couple of specific classes in the CSS code, which we're soon going to add. So now we add class mode on both the button and the router link, and now it's time for styling. So let's add some scoped CSS styling down there, and attached you find a button CSS file with all the button styles in there. And here I set up a base styling, and I'm always targeting button and anchor tag because the router link will render an anchor tag in the end. And then here the hover and active styles, and also the flat and outline styles. And these are the two modes which I support, because here I'm selecting the flat class and the outline class. So these styles will kick in if a flat or outline class is added to the button or link. And that's exactly what we do with mode. If mode is set to flat, the flat class will be added, and therefore these flat styles will kick in. And that's my base button. This base button can now also be defined in main.js. So we import base button from /components UI base button.view, and then also call app component base button here, like that. And now we can use the base button in various places of this app. In coaches list, for example, I have these two links here, or one button and one link. Both should be a base button. So here I'll use base button for my refresh button. Currently it's not doing anything, but that will change soon. And here we can replace router link with base button. The to prop still exists because we added that to our router link in the base button. But here, since this should be a link, I now also set the link prop, and just adding it like this automatically sets it to true already. And therefore this should now look like a link, or should render a link. On the other hand, for this refresh button, I want to use mode and set this to outline to make sure that here I'm using a different look. And in coach item, we also got buttons, or links in this case, and these should look like buttons though. So these two router links, here I'll also use base button and replace router link with base button. And then add the link prop on both. And on the first base button, I'll set the mode to outline as well to use that look here. If we save this, this looks a lot nicer, I would say. Now we got these buttons, which still act as links, but which look like buttons. And with that, we made a huge step forward. Now I want to render these areas of expertise in a nicer way, and for that I prepared this base badge component. Here, we're going to add a template and render a span, let's say, where in the span we simply output a title or a text property, whatever you want. On the span, I'll add a class of badge, but then in addition bind class dynamically to type. Now that of course means that here we should also accept some props, and I'll be lazy again here. I expect to get a type prop here, and let's say a title prop. We have text here, but that will be a computed property soon. And now we can add computed here, because actually my text computed property here, that should actually be the title prop to uppercase. It's just a transformation I want here. Of course, it's nothing you have to add, but I want to make sure that the title we receive as a prop is turned to all uppercase and then output like this here. And now we can add some styling here, some scoped CSS styling. And as so often, you find those styles attached in the badge CSS file. And I got a basic badge style here, where I just give this some base color, some padding, display inline block. And then I got 3 specific class styles here for frontend, backend, and career, where essentially the background color is changing. And these classes will be added by adding the type prop, because here we bind the class to type. So if we set the type to frontend on the badge, when we later use it, the frontend CSS class will be added, and therefore these styles will be rendered. And now we just need to register this as a global component again. So here in main.js, I'll import base badge from /components UI base badge.view. And then add component base badge like this. And with that added in coach item, we can use this base badge component now. So there, instead of rendering a span like this, I want to loop through my base badge. So replace span with that. And we no longer pass something between the tags because this component has no slot. Instead, we should set a type here and bind this dynamically to area, because the areas I have in my data are frontend, backend, and career, and these are exactly the CSS classes supported here. Therefore, by the way, we could argue whether that really is a base component. It's very specific to the coaches areas, of course, but we do have some base styling as well. That's why I keep it as a base component, but that's just a side note. But now back to coach item. Besides setting the type, we should also bind the title, and that's also bound to area. So it's the same value bound to different props here. We could theoretically use one prop, but since these props are used differently inside of the component, I want to make it clear where we use these props by picking different prop names. So with that, if we now save this, we got these nice badges, and therefore this already looks much, much nicer, I would say. Why don't we make sure that as a next step, we can also go to the details page and view the concrete details for a selected coach?